I finally learned why my best friend ditched me. I don't know how I'll move on from this. 8 years of friendship, gone without a single word of explanation. No fight, no argument, just complete radio silence after we'd already made plans to be roommates next semester. My name is Jessica, and I'm 19 years old. What I'm about to tell you completely shattered everything I thought I knew about friendship, trust, and the person I believed was my closest confidant in the world. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when everything was perfect. I met Madison during our first week of 6th grade at Lincoln Middle School. I was the new kid, having just moved to Denver with my family, and I was absolutely terrified. You know that feeling when you're 11 years old and everyone already has their established friend groups? That was me, standing in the cafeteria with my lunch tray, scanning for an empty seat where I wouldn't be completely alone. That's when I saw her. Madison was sitting by herself near the window, reading a book instead of talking to the other kids. She had these bright green eyes and curly red hair that caught the sunlight, and something about her calm demeanor made me think she might be safe to approach. I remember walking over, my heart pounding, and asking if I could sit down. "Sure," she said, barely looking up from her book. "I'm Madison." "Jessica," I replied, setting my tray down carefully. We didn't talk much that first day, but we sat together again the next day, and the day after that. Slowly, we started sharing little things about ourselves. I learned that Madison loved fantasy novels and had read the entire Harry Potter series 3 times already. She discovered that I was obsessed with art and spent most of my free time drawing in sketchbooks. We were both quiet kids who preferred books and creativity to the social chaos that surrounded us. By the end of that first semester, we were inseparable. Madison would come over to my house after school, and we'd spend hours in my room. I'd draw while she read, and sometimes she'd read passages aloud to me while I sketched characters from her stories. My mom would bring us snacks and joke that we were like 2 peas in a pod. Madison became like a second daughter to her, and honestly, she became like a sister to me. Our friendship was the kind you read about in books or see in movies. We had inside jokes that would make us burst into laughter at the most inappropriate times. We knew each other's deepest fears and wildest dreams. Madison wanted to be a veterinarian because she couldn't stand the thought of animal suffering. I wanted to be a graphic designer and maybe illustrate children's books someday. We made plans about how we'd stay friends forever, how we'd be each other's bridesmaids, how our kids would grow up together. Through middle school and into high school, nothing changed between us. If anything, our bond grew stronger. When Madison's parents went through a messy divorce during our sophomore year, she spent almost every weekend at my house. My parents didn't mind, they loved having her around. When I had my first panic attack junior year and was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, Madison was the one who researched breathing techniques and learned how to help me through the worst moments. "You're going to be okay, Jess," she'd tell me during those scary episodes. "I'm right here. We'll get through this together." And we did get through everything together. SATs, college applications, prom planning, graduation. When we both got accepted to Colorado State University, we were over the moon. Not only were we going to the same school, but we'd applied for a double room in the freshman dorms. Everything was falling into place exactly as we dreamed. Can you believe it? Madison said the day we got our housing confirmation. We were sitting in my backyard, sharing a pint of ice cream and watching the sunset. "We're actually going to be roommates in college. This is going to be the best 4 years ever." I agreed completely. After 8 years of friendship, I couldn't imagine navigating college with anyone else by my side. Madison knew everything about me, including my autism diagnosis, which I'd received just before senior year. She understood that I needed clear communication and that I sometimes missed social cues that seemed obvious to everyone else. She'd learned to be direct with me when something was bothering her, because she knew I genuinely couldn't pick up on subtle hints. "Promise me," I'd told her multiple times over the years, "if I ever do something that upsets you, just tell me directly. I can't read between the lines like other people can." "Of course, Jess," she'd always reply. "That's what best friends do. We talk things through." Our freshman year started exactly as I'd hoped. Our dorm room was perfect. We decorated it together over the summer, choosing complementary bedding and finding the perfect desk setup so I could draw while she studied. We fell into an easy routine. Madison was majoring in pre-veterinary medicine, so she had a lot of science courses and lab work. I was in the art program, which meant late nights in the studio and early morning critiques. Despite our different schedules, we made time for each other. We'd have breakfast together most mornings, and Madison would tell me about her biology professor who reminded her of a character from one of her fantasy novels. I'd show her my latest projects, and she'd give me honest feedback that somehow always made my work better. Your perspective on lighting is getting so much stronger, she told me one evening in February, looking at a painting I'd been struggling with for weeks. Remember when you used to be afraid to use dark shadows? Look at this now. Those were the moments I treasured most, when Madison could see my growth in ways I couldn't see myself. She believed in me when I doubted my abilities, and I did the same for her when organic chemistry made her question whether she was smart enough for veterinary school. We explored Fort Collins together on weekends, finding little coffee shops and used bookstores. Madison discovered a Christian fellowship group on campus in the spring semester, which surprised me a little since she'd never been particularly religious before, but I was happy she was finding community. She seemed more confident and peaceful after she started attending their meetings. I'm reading through the Bible with the group, she mentioned one evening while we were both studying. I looked up from my art history textbook and saw her with a Bible I'd never seen before. Really? That's interesting, I said. What made you decide to start reading it? You never mentioned being curious about Christianity before. Madison looked up from her book, and I noticed her expression shift slightly. I just wanted to explore it. Sarah from the fellowship recommended it. That's cool, I replied. Is it helping you feel more connected to the group? She gave me a short nod and went back to reading. I didn't think much of it at the time. People explore new interests in college, and I was genuinely glad she was finding something meaningful. As spring semester progressed, I started noticing small changes in Madison, but I attributed them to the normal stress of college life. She seemed a little more distant sometimes, spending more evenings at fellowship meetings and less time hanging out in our room. When I'd suggest watching a movie or walking to our favorite coffee shop, she'd often say she had plans with her new Christian friends. I tried not to feel hurt by this. I wanted Madison to have other friendships and interests. I'd made friends in my art classes too, and I understood that college was about expanding your horizons. But sometimes, late at night when she'd come back from a fellowship event, I'd feel a small pang of loneliness that I hadn't experienced since before we became friends. The first real crack in our perfect friendship came in March. I'd been working on a particularly challenging sculpture project for my 3D art class, and I was struggling to get to the art studio with all my materials. The sculpture required several heavy pieces that I simply couldn't carry on the campus shuttle, and I didn't have a car. Madison had brought her car to campus second semester, a small SUV her dad had helped her buy. We'd talked about how convenient it would be for grocery runs and weekend trips to nearby hiking trails. So when I realized I needed help getting my project materials to the studio, I naturally thought of asking her. Hey Mads, I said one evening while she was at her desk. Could you possibly give me a ride to the art building tomorrow? I have all these heavy pieces for my sculpture project, and there's no way I can carry them on the shuttle. She looked up from her homework, and I noticed a slight hesitation. What time? Maybe around 2? After your biology lab? I guess so, she said, but her tone wasn't enthusiastic. How long will it take? Just the drive there and back. Maybe 15 minutes total? I really appreciate it. Madison nodded and returned to her work. The next day, she drove me to the art building as promised, but she seemed quiet during the ride. I chalked it up to stress from her upcoming organic chemistry exam and thanked her profusely for helping me. The second time I needed her help was in April. Our dorm's internet had been down for 2 days, and I was unable to access the grocery delivery app one usually used. I'd been surviving on granola bars and whatever snacks I had in our room, but I desperately needed to buy actual food. Madison, I'm so sorry to ask, but could you possibly drive me to King Soopers? The internet is still down, and I can't order delivery. I'll be super quick, I promise. Again, that hesitation. I have a fellowship meeting at 7. It's only 3 now, I said. We'd be back with plenty of time. She agreed, but I could sense her reluctance. During the trip to the grocery store, she seemed to be checking the time frequently, and when I took longer than expected to find everything on my list, I noticed her tapping her fingers on the cart handle. I'm so sorry, Mads, I said as we loaded the groceries into her car. I know you have plans tonight. Thank you for doing this. It's fine, she said, but something in her voice suggested it wasn't entirely fine. The third and final time I asked for her help was in early May, and it was completely unplanned. I'd stayed late in the art studio working on my final portfolio, and when I finally finished around 9 p.m., I discovered it was pouring rain outside. The campus shuttle had stopped running, and I didn't have an umbrella or rain jacket. I was stranded with a portfolio full of artwork that couldn't get wet. I called Madison from the studio. Hey, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm stuck at the art building in the rain. Could you possibly pick me up? I have my final portfolio with me, and I can't let it get wet. There was a long pause. Jessica, I'm already in my pajamas. I know, and I hate to ask. But I don't know what else to do. The shuttle isn't running, and I can't protect my artwork in this rain. Another pause. Fine. I'll be there in 10 minutes. When Madison arrived, she was indeed in pajamas with a raincoat thrown over them, and she looked irritated. The drive back to our dorm was silent except for the sound of rain on the windshield and my repeated apologies and thank yous. I really appreciate this, Mads. I owe you big time. It's fine, she said again, but I could tell it really wasn't fine. Looking back now, I can see that these 3 incidents were building something in Madison's mind, creating a narrative that I was completely unaware of. But at the time, I thought we were just being normal friends helping each other out. She'd never told me she felt imposed upon or taken advantage of. According to everything I understood about our friendship, asking for help in genuine emergencies was perfectly acceptable. The end came suddenly at the end of May, right after our freshman year finals. We'd both finished our exams and were preparing to head home for the summer. I was excited about our plans for the fall. We'd already received our room assignment for sophomore year, and I'd been researching fun activities we could do in Fort Collins when we returned. I can't wait to explore more of those hiking trails next year, I said to Madison as we started packing up our dorm room. And maybe we could join one of those intramural sports teams. You always said you wanted to try volleyball again. Madison was folding clothes into her suitcase, and she didn't respond right away. When she did look up, something in her expression was different. Cold. Distant. Jessica, I need to tell you something. My heart immediately started racing. Madison's tone was serious in a way I'd rarely heard before, and my anxiety kicked into high gear. Okay, I said, sitting down on my bed. What is it? I don't think we should room together next year. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten and my breathing become shallow, the familiar signs of a panic attack beginning. What? Why? I managed to ask. Did I do something wrong? Are you upset about something? Madison continued packing without looking at me. I just think we need space. We've been living together all year, and I think it would be good for both of us to branch out. But we already have our room assignment, I said, my voice starting to shake. We've been planning this since high school. If something's bothering you, can't we talk about it? There's nothing specific to talk about, Madison replied. I just want to room with someone from my fellowship group next year. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. This conversation was coming out of nowhere, and Madison was being vague in a way that was particularly difficult for me to process. I needed concrete information, clear explanations, but she wasn't giving me any. Mads, please. If I did something to upset you, just tell me. You know I can't pick up on hints or subtle cues. If there's a problem, I need you to be direct with me. Madison finally stopped packing and looked at me directly. Jessica, not everything is about your autism. Sometimes people just grow apart. That's normal in college. Her words stung because they felt dismissive of something we'd always worked through together. Madison had always understood my need for clear communication and had never made me feel bad about it before. Okay, I said quietly, wiping my eyes. I guess if that's what you want, we can figure out new roommate situations. I was hoping this was just a temporary disagreement, that maybe Madison was stressed about something and we'd work through it like we always did. But over the next few days, as we finished packing and prepared to leave campus, Madison became increasingly distant. She stopped making eye contact with me, gave short responses to my attempts at conversation, and seemed to be avoiding spending any alone time together. Our final night in the dorm was heartbreaking. I'd imagined we'd stay up late talking about our freshman year, laughing about funny memories, maybe getting emotional about how much we'd grown. Instead, Madison went to bed early without saying much more than good night. The next morning, we both left campus with our families. Madison's goodbye was brief and impersonal. Have a good summer, Jessica, she said, giving me an awkward hug that felt nothing like the warm embraces we'd shared thousands of times before. You too, Mads. Maybe we can hang out when we're both back home. Maybe, she said, but something in her tone suggested that wasn't likely to happen. And then she was gone. I watched her dad's car pull away from the dorm, and I felt an emptiness that I'd never experienced before. After 8 years of daily contact, constant communication, and shared everything, Madison had simply walked out of my life. The summer was brutal. I kept expecting Madison to reach out, to text me about something funny she'd seen or to share a photo from her summer job. We'd never gone more than a few days without talking since we'd become friends, and the silence was deafening. I tried reaching out myself, sending casual texts about things I thought she'd find interesting. I shared photos from my summer art class and asked about her volunteer work at the animal shelter. Her responses, when they came at all, were brief and polite but lacked any of the warmth and personality that had defined our relationship. Hey Mads, just saw the most beautiful sunset. Made me think of that time we watched the stars from your backyard and talked until dawn. Hope your summer is going well. Her response, 3 days later, sounds nice. Summer is good. That was it. No follow-up questions, no shared memory, no invitation to continue the conversation. It was like texting with a polite stranger. By July, Madison had stopped responding to my messages altogether. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for some sign that our friendship wasn't really over. I scrolled through old photos of us together, reading old text conversations, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. The worst part was not understanding why. Madison had always been direct with me when something was bothering her. In middle school, when I went through a phase of being obsessed with a particular TV show and wouldn't stop talking about it, she gently told me I was bringing it up too much. In high school, when I was going through a difficult period with my anxiety and was probably more needy than usual, she'd kindly suggested I talk to my therapist about coping strategies. We'd always worked through our issues together. This time was different. Madison had shut down completely, offering no explanation and no opportunity for resolution. For someone with autism who relies on clear communication and logical problem solving, this was particularly devastating. I couldn't fix a problem I didn't understand. My parents tried to be supportive, but they were as confused as I was. They'd watched Madison and me grow up together and had never seen any signs of serious conflict between us. Maybe she's just going through something personal, my mom suggested. College can be a time of big changes for people. Give her some space, and maybe she'll come around. But deep down, I was starting to realize that Madison wasn't coming around. This wasn't a temporary rough patch or a misunderstanding that would blow over. Something fundamental had changed in how she saw me and our friendship, and I had no idea what it was. When August came and it was time to return to campus for sophomore year, I was a nervous wreck. Madison and I had successfully changed our roommate assignments. She was now living with someone from her Christian fellowship, and I was matched with a random student who seemed nice enough in our email exchanges. But I knew I'd be seeing Madison around campus, in the dining halls, maybe even in some classes, and I didn't know how to handle that. The first few weeks of sophomore year were lonely in a way I hadn't expected. Yes, I had my new roommate, Elena, who was perfectly kind and respectful. I had my friends from art classes, and I was taking some interesting courses. But everywhere I went on campus, I was reminded of experiences I'd shared with Madison the year before. I'd walk past the coffee shop where we used to study together on Sunday afternoons, and I'd feel this hollow ache in my chest. I'd see groups of friends laughing together in the dining hall, and I'd remember how Madison and I used to sit in our spot by the windows, sharing gossip and dreams and inside jokes. The hardest part was that I'd occasionally see Madison around campus. She looked happy, surrounded by new friends from her fellowship group. She seemed to have moved on completely, while I was still struggling to understand what had happened to us. One particularly difficult day in September, I ran into her directly outside the library. We were both walking toward the entrance, and there was no way to avoid each other. "Hi Madison," I said, my heart pounding. "Oh, hi Jessica," she replied, her tone polite but distant. We stood there for an awkward moment, and I felt a desperate urge to try to bridge the gap between us. "How are your classes going?" I asked. "Good. Yours?" "Good." I paused, then took a breath and tried to be more genuine. "Mads, I miss talking to you. I miss our friendship. If I did something to hurt you, I really want to understand what it was so I can make it right." Madison's expression softened slightly, but then she shook her head. "Jessica, some things just run their course. We had a good friendship, but we're different people now." "But we don't have to be," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "We can grow and still be friends. We can adapt to who we're becoming." "I don't think so," Madison said gently. "I think it's better if we both just move forward." And with that, she walked into the library, leaving me standing alone on the steps, feeling more confused and heartbroken than ever. The months that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I threw myself into my artwork, spending long hours in the studio trying to process my emotions through paint and clay and charcoal. My professors noticed the intensity and emotional depth of my work during this period, and while I was creating some of my best pieces, I was also struggling with depression and anxiety in ways I hadn't since high school. I started seeing a counselor at the campus mental health center, trying to understand why the loss of this friendship was affecting me so profoundly. "It sounds like Madison was more than just a friend to you," my counselor, Dr. Rivera, observed during one of our sessions. "She was your primary support system, your closest confidant, and your sense of social stability. Losing that kind of relationship is genuinely traumatic, especially when you don't understand why it happened. But why won't she just tell me what went wrong? I asked, tears streaming down my face. We used to be able to talk about anything. If I hurt her feelings or did something inappropriate, why can't she give me a chance to apologize and change? Sometimes people end relationships not because of one specific incident, but because their perception of the relationship has shifted, Dr. Rivera explained. It's possible that Madison developed feelings of resentment or frustration that built up over time, and rather than addressing them directly, she decided it was easier to end the friendship entirely. This explanation made sense intellectually, but it didn't ease the pain. If anything, it made me feel worse to think that Madison had been harboring negative feelings about me without giving me any opportunity to address them. Winter came and went, and I slowly started to build a new life without Madison. I grew closer to Elena, my roommate, who turned out to be an incredibly thoughtful and supportive friend. I joined an art club on campus and met other creative students who shared my interests. I even started dating someone, a sweet guy named Marcus from my art history class who made me laugh and appreciated my quirky sense of humor. But even as I was building these new relationships and finding happiness in other areas of my life, I still felt the absence of my friendship with Madison like a persistent ache. I'd see something funny and instinctively reach for my phone to text her before remembering that we didn't talk anymore. I'd have a particularly good or bad day and feel the urge to call her before stopping myself. It was in the spring of my sophomore year, almost a full year after Madison had cut me out of her life, that I finally learned the truth about why our friendship had ended. And the way I found out was perhaps even more painful than the original abandonment. I was at a party off campus with Elena and some other friends. It was a casual gathering, mostly art students and a few people from other majors who had become part of our social circle. I was having a good time, feeling more social and confident than I had in months, when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Two girls I didn't know well were talking near the kitchen, and one of them mentioned Madison's name. My ears perked up involuntarily. Yeah, Madison from the Christian Fellowship, one of them was saying. She was telling us about this friend she used to have who was just super demanding and would always make her drive her places. Like, constantly asking for rides and acting all entitled about it. My heart started pounding. I moved closer, pretending to get a drink from the kitchen while straining to hear more. And apparently the friend was really judgmental about her faith too, the second girl added. Madison said she would make snide comments about Christianity and act all superior about being agnostic or whatever. She said it got really uncomfortable, especially when she was just trying to explore her spirituality. I felt like I was going to be sick. They were talking about me. Madison had been telling people, probably lots of people, her version of why our friendship had ended, and the person she was describing sounded nothing like who I believed myself to be. I made an excuse to Elena about not feeling well and left the party immediately. I walked back to my dorm in a daze, my mind reeling with what I'd just heard. By the time I got to my room, I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. The demanding friend who constantly asked for rides. The judgmental agnostic who made snide comments about Christianity. Was that really how Madison saw me? Was that really what our 8-year friendship had been reduced to in her mind? I spent that night and the following days obsessively analyzing every interaction Madison and I had ever had, trying to understand how my actions could have been interpreted so differently from my intentions. The 3 times I'd asked for rides, were those really excessive? The first time, I genuinely needed help transporting my art project. The second time, I'd been without food for 2 days because of the internet outage. The third time, I'd been stranded in the rain with irreplaceable artwork. In each case, I'd apologized profusely, thanked her repeatedly, and tried to make the requests as convenient for her as possible. But maybe Madison had seen a pattern that I'd been blind to. Maybe from her perspective, I was the friend who always needed something, who couldn't handle her own problems, who treated her like a personal taxi service. The thought that I might have been taking advantage of someone I loved so much was devastating. I'd always tried so hard to be a good friend, to be supportive and grateful and thoughtful. The idea that I'd failed so completely, that I'd been causing Madison stress and resentment without realizing it, made me feel sick with shame. And then there was the religion issue. I replayed the conversation we'd had about the Bible, the one evening in our dorm room when I'd asked why she was reading it. I'd thought I was being curious and supportive, showing interest in something new she was exploring. But maybe my tone had come across differently. Maybe my question about why she'd never been interested in Christianity before had sounded dismissive or condescending. As someone with autism, I've always struggled with tone and social cues. It's entirely possible that what I intended as friendly curiosity came across as judgment or superiority. Maybe Madison had interpreted my question not as genuine interest but as skepticism about her newfound faith. The more I thought about it, the more I could see how Madison might have built a narrative in her mind about who I was and what our friendship meant to her. From her perspective, maybe I was the selfish friend who only reached out when I needed something, who couldn't drive myself places, who made subtle digs at her beliefs, who expected her to accommodate my autism-related needs without giving much back in return. This realization was almost worse than not knowing. When I'd been confused about why our friendship had ended, I could at least maintain some hope that it was based on a misunderstanding that could be cleared up. Now I understood that Madison had ended our friendship because she genuinely believed I was a bad friend who had treated her poorly. And the most heartbreaking part was that I couldn't even say she was completely wrong. Yes, her interpretation of my actions seemed harsh and uncharitable, but I could see how someone might view my behavior the way she had. I had asked her for rides multiple times. I had questioned her religious exploration. Maybe I hadn't been as considerate or self-aware as I'd thought I was. The guilt was overwhelming. I kept thinking about all the ways I could have been a better friend, all the signs I might have missed that Madison was feeling burdened by our relationship. Why hadn't I been more independent? Why hadn't I gotten my own car or found other transportation options? Why hadn't I been more careful about how I discussed her faith journey? But then, in my more rational moments, I'd remember all the good parts of our friendship. I'd think about the countless times I'd supported Madison through difficult periods, the hours I'd spent listening to her problems and offering advice and encouragement. I'd remember the way I'd been there for her during her parents' divorce, how I'd helped her with school projects, how I'd celebrated her successes and comforted her during failures. I'd also remember that Madison had explicitly told me to ask for help when I needed it. During our freshman year, when we were discussing how my autism affected my daily life, she'd said that she wanted me to feel comfortable reaching out to her in emergencies. She'd specifically said that friends should be able to rely on each other, and that she was happy to help me navigate situations that were challenging for me. Had that been a lie? Had she been secretly resenting every request while telling me it was fine? Or had something changed in her perception over the course of the year that turned what should have been normal friend support into evidence that I was taking advantage of her? I also couldn't shake the feeling that Madison's interpretation of the religion conversation was unfair. I'd asked one question out of genuine curiosity, and I'd been nothing but supportive of her involvement with the Christian fellowship. I'd never made jokes about her faith, never criticized her beliefs, never done anything that should have made her feel judged. But maybe that didn't matter. Maybe the damage was done the moment she interpreted my tone as condescending, regardless of my actual intentions. And maybe once she started viewing our friendship through a negative lens, every subsequent interaction got filtered through that perception until everything I did seemed selfish or judgmental. The hardest part was accepting that Madison had never given me a chance to address her concerns. She'd built up this negative narrative about me in her mind and decided to end our friendship without ever telling me there was a problem. For someone who had always believed in communication and working through conflicts together, this felt like a betrayal that went beyond the specific complaints she apparently had about me. I found myself angry at Madison in a way I'd never been before. Yes, maybe I hadn't been a perfect friend, but didn't our 8 years together earn me the right to at least know what I'd done wrong? Didn't I deserve a chance to apologize, to change, to show her that I could be better? But then I'd remember that Madison didn't owe me anything. She had the right to end a friendship that wasn't serving her anymore, even if her reasons seemed unfair to me. Maybe from her perspective, she'd given me enough chances already and decided that it wasn't worth the confrontation to try to work things out. Spring turned to summer, and I went home for break feeling emotionally exhausted but somewhat more at peace with the situation. I'd spent months in therapy working through my feelings about the friendship and learning to accept that some relationships end without closure or resolution. Dr. Rivera had helped me understand that I could acknowledge my mistakes without taking full responsibility for the relationship's failure, and that Madison's interpretation of events wasn't necessarily the objective truth. Relationships are subjective experiences, she'd told me. Two people can go through the exact same events and come away with completely different understandings of what happened. Neither person is necessarily lying or wrong, they're just filtering their experiences through different lenses. This summer, I made a conscious effort to focus on the relationships I still had rather than mourning the one I'd lost. I spent time with high school friends who welcomed me back into their lives as if no time had passed. I worked at a local art gallery, gaining experience in the field I hoped to enter after graduation. I continued therapy and worked on building confidence and self-awareness. I also made peace with the fact that I might never get the closure I wanted with Madison. She'd moved on with her life, and I needed to do the same with mine. That didn't mean I stopped caring about her or hoping she was happy, but I couldn't keep allowing the loss of our friendship to define my emotional state. When I returned to campus for my junior year, I felt stronger and more independent than I had in a long time. I'd gotten my driver's license over the summer and bought a used car with money I'd saved from my gallery job. I was excited about my advanced art courses and had already started thinking about senior thesis projects. I'd maintained the friendships I'd built during sophomore year and was looking forward to deepening those connections. The campus felt different now that I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder for glimpses of Madison or analyzing every familiar location for memories of our friendship. I could walk past our old coffee shop without feeling that sharp pang of loss. I could enjoy the places and spaces that had once been ours, without feeling like I was trespassing on sacred ground. I did see Madison occasionally. It was impossible to completely avoid someone on a campus of our size, but these encounters no longer left me devastated. I'd nod politely if we made eye contact, and she'd do the same, and then we'd both continue with our lives. It was sad, but it no longer felt tragic. One day in October, I was walking across campus with Elena when we passed Madison and a group of her fellowship friends. They were laughing about something, and Madison looked genuinely happy. For just a moment, I felt that old familiar ache of missing her, missing the easy joy we used to share together. "You okay?" Elena asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah," I said, and realized I meant it. Just thinking about how different things are now compared to freshman year. Different good or different bad? I considered the question seriously. Yes, I'd lost my oldest and closest friendship, and that was genuinely painful. But I'd also learned things about myself, developed new relationships, and grown in ways that might not have happened if everything had stayed the same. Different complicated, I said finally. But I think I'm okay with complicated. As my junior year progressed, I found myself thinking less and less about Madison and more about the future I was building for myself. I was doing well in my classes, creating artwork that I was genuinely proud of, and developing relationships that felt healthy and reciprocal. I'd learned to be more direct about my needs and more aware of the impact my actions might have on others. The experience with Madison had taught me to be more independent and self-reliant. I rarely asked friends for favors unless it was truly necessary, and when I did, I was careful to reciprocate and show appreciation. I also became more conscious of tone and context when discussing sensitive topics, especially religion and politics. These weren't necessarily bad changes, even though they'd come from a painful experience. I was becoming a more thoughtful friend and a more self-aware person, even if the lessons had come at a high cost. It wasn't until the spring of my junior year that I learned there was more to Madison's version of events than what I'd overheard at that party. I was at a campus event, an art exhibition featuring student work, when I ran into Sarah, one of the girls from Madison's Christian Fellowship group. "Jessica," she said, approaching me with a warm smile. "I love your pieces in the show. That mixed media installation is incredible." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely pleased by the compliment. Sarah and I had always been friendly when we'd encountered each other around campus, even after my friendship with Madison had ended. We chatted for a few minutes about the exhibition, and then Sarah's expression grew more serious. "You know," she said, lowering her voice slightly, "I've always felt bad about what happened between you and Madison. I think there might have been some misunderstandings." My heart started beating faster. After almost 2 years of wondering and speculating, was I finally going to get some real answers? "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Sarah glanced around to make sure we couldn't be overheard. "Well, Madison did talk to some of us in the fellowship about your friendship ending. And honestly, some of the things she said never quite sat right with me." I waited, trying to keep my expression neutral even though my mind was racing. "She said you were always asking her for rides and that you made her feel like a taxi service," Sarah continued. "But from what I observed, that seemed pretty exaggerated. I mean, I saw you two together a lot that first year, and you always seemed grateful when she helped you with anything." "I only asked her for rides 3 times the entire year," I said quietly. "And only in genuine emergencies." "That's what I thought," Sarah nodded. "Madison has a tendency to amplify things sometimes. Like, if something bothers her even a little bit, it becomes this huge issue in her mind." Sarah paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "And the religion thing, she said you were judgmental about her faith, but honestly, I think she was just feeling defensive because she was new to Christianity and wasn't confident in her beliefs yet. Some of us in the fellowship noticed that she seemed to interpret any question about her faith as an attack, even when people were just trying to understand or show interest. This revelation was both validating and devastating. On one hand, it confirmed what I'd suspected, that Madison had blown our minor conflicts out of proportion and interpreted my actions in the least charitable way possible. On the other hand, it meant that our 8-year friendship had been destroyed by misunderstandings and poor communication that could have been resolved if Madison had just talked to me directly. I tried so many times to get her to tell me what was wrong, I said, feeling tears starting to form. I kept asking her to be direct with me if I was doing something that bothered her. I know, Sarah said sympathetically. I think Madison just got overwhelmed with college and all the changes, and instead of dealing with her feelings about your friendship, she decided it was easier to just end it. It wasn't fair to you. We talked for a few more minutes, and Sarah shared a few more insights that helped me understand Madison's mindset during that period. Apparently, Madison had been struggling with the transition to college more than she'd let on. She'd been homesick, stressed about her pre-vet coursework, and feeling pressure to fit in with new social groups. I think she saw your friendship as representing her old self, Sarah explained. And when she was trying to reinvent herself in college, she felt like maintaining that connection was holding her back somehow. This perspective was heartbreaking but illuminating. It suggested that Madison hadn't ended our friendship because I was a terrible friend, but because she was going through her own identity crisis and couldn't figure out how to maintain old relationships while building new ones. After my conversation with Sarah, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was relief in finally understanding that I hadn't been as awful a friend as Madison had made me out to be. There was validation in knowing that an objective observer had noticed the unfairness of Madison's characterizations. But there was also a deep sadness in realizing that our friendship had been sacrificed not because of any real incompatibility, but because of Madison's inability to communicate her feelings and work through temporary challenges. I found myself grieving the friendship all over again, but in a different way. Now I wasn't just mourning the loss of Madison from my life, I was mourning the waste of it all. The unnecessary destruction of something beautiful and meaningful because of fear, poor communication, and misunderstanding. Over the following weeks, I caught myself wondering what would have happened if Madison had just talked to me honestly about her concerns. What if she'd said, "Jessica, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I need you to be more independent with transportation"? What if she'd said, "I'm exploring Christianity, and I need you to be extra supportive right now because I'm feeling vulnerable about it"? I would have listened. I would have adjusted my behavior. I would have been more careful about how I approached sensitive topics and more proactive about finding alternative solutions to my transportation challenges. We could have worked through these issues together, the way we'd worked through every other challenge in our 8 years of friendship. But Madison had chosen a different path. Instead of giving me the opportunity to be a better friend, she'd decided I was beyond redemption and had cut me out of her life completely. The finality of that choice, especially now that I understood how unnecessary it had been, was almost unbearable. I spent several therapy sessions processing this new information with Dr. Rivera. "How do you feel about learning that your interpretation of events was largely correct?" she asked during one session. "Vindicated, I guess," I said. "But also incredibly sad. It's almost worse knowing that we could have saved our friendship if Madison had just been willing to communicate with me." "That must be very frustrating," Dr. Rivera agreed. "But I want you to consider something. You've spent 2 years learning to be more independent, more self-aware, and more considerate of others' boundaries. Those are valuable skills that will serve you in all your future relationships. In some ways, this painful experience has helped you become a better friend." She was right, of course. The loss of my friendship with Madison had forced me to grow in ways that I might not have otherwise. I'd learned not to take relationships for granted, to be more proactive about addressing conflicts, and to be more conscious of the impact my actions might have on others. But growth that comes from trauma always feels bittersweet. Yes, I was a more mature and self-aware person than I'd been 2 years ago, but I would have gladly traded all that growth to have my best friend back. As my junior year drew to a close, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wrote Madison a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter that I could put in an envelope and mail to her dorm. I'd been thinking about everything Sarah had told me, about all the misunderstandings and missed opportunities for communication, and I realized I had one more chance to try to bridge the gap between us. I didn't write the letter expecting Madison to suddenly want to be friends again. Too much time had passed, and we'd both built new lives without each other. But I wrote it because I needed to say the things I'd never had the chance to say, to acknowledge my mistakes while also defending my intentions, and to offer Madison a different perspective on our friendship's end. The letter took me several drafts to get right. I wanted to be honest about my hurt and confusion while also being mature and non-accusatory. I wanted to take responsibility for my mistakes without accepting blame for misunderstandings that weren't entirely my fault. "Dear Madison," I began. "I know it's been almost 2 years since we last really talked, and I'm not writing this because I expect anything from you. I just learned some things recently that helped me understand what happened between us, and I felt like I needed to share my perspective with you, even if it's too late to change anything. I went on to acknowledge that I could see how my requests for rides might have felt burdensome, even though that was never my intention. I explained that I'd gotten my driver's license and bought a car specifically because I never wanted to be in a position again where I had to rely on friends for transportation. I addressed the religion issue directly, explaining that my question about her Bible reading had come from genuine curiosity and support for her spiritual exploration, not from judgment or superiority. I told her that I'd always respected her faith journey and was sorry if my tone had suggested otherwise. But I also gently defended myself. I reminded Madison of all the times I'd supported her through difficult periods, of the 8 years of loyalty and love that should have earned me the benefit of the doubt when conflicts arose. I told her how much it had hurt to be cut out of her life without explanation, especially given my autism and my need for clear communication. I understand that college is a time of change and growth, I wrote near the end of the letter. I understand that sometimes people need to step away from old relationships to figure out who they want to become. But I wish you'd trusted me enough to let me be part of that journey instead of deciding I was an obstacle to it. I ended the letter by telling Madison that I didn't regret our friendship, even knowing how it ended. I told her that the 8 years we'd shared had been some of the best of my life, and that I hoped she was happy and thriving in whatever path she'd chosen. If you ever want to talk, I concluded, I'm still the same person who cares about you and wants the best for you. But if you don't, I understand that too. I just wanted you to know that our friendship meant everything to me, and I'm sorry we couldn't find a way to save it. I sealed the letter in an envelope, wrote Madison's name and dorm address on the front, and walked to the campus post office before I could change my mind. I never received a response. Part of me had hoped that reading my letter might prompt Madison to reach out, even if just to acknowledge that she'd received it. But as days turned into weeks with no word from her, I accepted that she'd made her choice about our relationship a long time ago and wasn't interested in revisiting it. The silence stung, but it also brought a kind of closure. I'd said everything I needed to say, offered every explanation and olive branch I could think of, and now I could truly let go knowing that I'd done everything in my power to salvage our friendship. My senior year began with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt since freshman year. I was no longer carrying the weight of unanswered questions or the hope that Madison and I might somehow reconcile. I could focus entirely on my art, my remaining friendships, my relationship with Marcus, and my plans for life after graduation. I threw myself into my senior thesis project, a series of mixed media pieces exploring themes of communication, misunderstanding, and the complexity of human relationships. My art professors were impressed by the emotional depth and technical sophistication of the work, and I felt proud of how I was channeling my experiences into something meaningful and beautiful. Elena and I had become incredibly close over our 3 years as roommates, and she was planning to move to Denver after graduation to start a career in environmental science. Marcus and I had been dating for over a year, and while we weren't making any definitive long-term plans yet, we were both hoping to find jobs in the same city after college. I had a small but solid group of friends from my art classes, people who understood my creative process and shared my passion for visual storytelling. I'd maintained relationships with a few high school friends and had grown closer to my family as I'd matured and learned to appreciate their support. In many ways, my social life was richer and more diverse than it had been when Madison was my primary relationship. I'd learned not to put all my emotional eggs in one basket, to cultivate multiple friendships instead of relying on one person to meet all my social and emotional needs. But there were still moments when I missed Madison with an intensity that took my breath away. I'd see a movie I knew she'd love, or read a book that would spark exactly the kind of deep conversation we used to have, and I'd feel that familiar ache of her absence. The hardest moment came in March of my senior year, when I learned through the campus grapevine that Madison had been accepted to Colorado State's veterinary school for the fall. She was achieving the dream we'd talked about since middle school, and I couldn't share in her joy or offer my congratulations. I found myself crying that night, not just for the specific milestone I was missing, but for all the future moments we'd never share. Madison's graduation from vet school, her first job at an animal clinic, maybe her wedding someday, maybe her children. We'd made so many plans about being part of each other's major life events, and now I'd only learn about her achievements through mutual acquaintances, if at all. But even in my sadness, I felt a genuine happiness for Madison's success. Whatever had happened between us, she was a brilliant, compassionate person who deserved to achieve her goals. The fact that I couldn't be part of her celebration didn't diminish my hope that she'd have a wonderful career helping animals and that she'd find fulfillment in the path she'd chosen. Graduation day arrived in May with a mixture of excitement and melancholy. I was proud of what I'd accomplished during my 4 years at Colorado State, grateful for the relationships I'd built and the person I'd become. But there was a bittersweet quality to the celebration, knowing that Madison was somewhere else on campus, probably graduating with honors from the pre-veterinary program, surrounded by her fellowship friends and her family. My parents drove up for the ceremony, and I could see the pride in their eyes as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. They'd watched me struggle through the loss of my oldest friendship and emerge stronger and more independent on the other side. They'd seen me build a new life for myself and create art that reflected both my pain and my growth. "We're so proud of who you've become," my mom said at the graduation dinner, tears in her eyes. "You've handled everything with such grace and maturity." I felt proud too, but also aware of how much the experience had cost me. Yes, I'd grown and learned and become more resilient. But I'd also lost something irreplaceable, and no amount of personal growth could fully compensate for that loss. After graduation, I moved to Denver and found a job at a small graphic design firm that specialized in nonprofit organizations. The work was meaningful and allowed me to use my artistic skills to help causes I cared about. Marcus found a position at an architecture firm in the same city, and we moved in together after dating long distance for a few months. Life was good. I was doing work I enjoyed, living with someone I loved, maintaining friendships with Elena and several people from college. I was seeing a new therapist in Denver who was helping me continue processing my experiences and building healthy relationship patterns. But I still thought about Madison more often than I probably should have. Denver wasn't that far from Fort Collins, and I sometimes wondered if she was still in the area for vet school or if she'd moved elsewhere. I'd catch myself looking for her in coffee shops and bookstores, even though the rational part of my brain knew that even if I did see her, we'd probably just exchange polite greetings and move on with our lives. It was almost exactly 3 years after our friendship had ended when I finally got closure, though not in the way I'd expected. I was having lunch with Elena at a restaurant in downtown Denver when I noticed a familiar figure at a table across the room. It was Madison, looking older and more polished than she had in college, but unmistakably the same person who had been my best friend for 8 years. She was with a man I didn't recognize, someone around our age who was dressed professionally and seemed to be holding her hand. They were deep in conversation, both smiling and looking genuinely happy together. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, following my gaze. "Is that Madison?" I nodded, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to get up and leave before she noticed me, but another part was curious to see how this encounter would play out. As if sensing my stare, Madison looked up and made direct eye contact with me. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the restaurant, 3 years of silence and hurt and growth passing between us. Then Madison did something that surprised me. She smiled and raised her hand in a small wave. I waved back, and for a few seconds, we just acknowledged each other's presence without any of the awkwardness or pain I'd expected to feel. Madison said something to her companion, then got up and walked over to my table. "Jessica," she said, her voice warm but tentative. "How are you?" "I'm good," I replied, standing up to give her a brief hug. "How are you?" "This is my roommate Elena from college, and Elena, this is Madison." Madison smiled at Elena. "Nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you over the years." This comment surprised me. Had Madison been asking people about me? Had she been keeping tabs on my life the way I'd occasionally wondered about hers? "Congratulations on getting into vet school," I said. "I heard through the grapevine." "That's amazing." "Thank you," Madison replied, looking genuinely pleased that I knew. "I'm loving it so far. It's challenging, but it's everything I hoped it would be." We chatted for a few more minutes about safe topics, our jobs, Denver, how different life was after college. The conversation was friendly but careful, both of us aware of the history between us but choosing not to address it directly. "Well, I should get back to my table," Madison said eventually. "It was really good to see you, Jessica. You look happy." "You too," I said. "Take care of yourself." As Madison walked back to her table, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness for what we'd lost, but also a kind of peace in seeing that she was doing well. The intense anger and hurt I'd carried for so long seemed to have faded into something more like wistful acceptance. "How do you feel?" Elena asked after Madison had returned to her table. "Okay, actually," I said, and realized I meant it. "It's good to see that she's happy." The brief encounter gave me a kind of closure I hadn't expected. Madison and I would never be friends again, too much time had passed, and we'd both built new lives that didn't include each other. But seeing her happy and thriving made me feel like both of us had ultimately ended up where we needed to be. Over the following months, I found myself thinking about Madison less frequently. When I did think about her, it was with a sense of gratitude for the good years we'd shared rather than bitterness about how things had ended. I'd learned that some relationships are meant to be temporary, even when they feel permanent at the time. The experience taught me valuable lessons about friendship, communication, and personal growth that I carried into all my subsequent relationships. I learned to be more direct about my needs and more attuned to others' boundaries. I learned not to make assumptions about what people are thinking or feeling, and to ask for clarification when something seems off. Most importantly, I learned that losing someone you love doesn't diminish the value of the time you shared with them. The 8 years Madison and I spent as best friends were real and meaningful, even though they ended badly. The joy, support, and connection we shared during that time helped shape who I became, and I wouldn't trade those experiences even knowing how much pain the ending would cause. Now, 5 years after our friendship ended, I can honestly say I'm grateful for all of it, the beautiful beginning, the painful middle, and the bittersweet end. Madison taught me what deep friendship could look like, and losing her taught me how to be resilient and independent. Both lessons were necessary for becoming the person I am today. I hope Madison feels the same way about our time together. I hope she remembers the good parts of our friendship with fondness rather than regret. And I hope that somewhere in her life as a veterinarian, maybe when she's comforting a scared animal or celebrating a successful surgery, she sometimes thinks about the girl who believed in her dreams before anyone else did. Because despite everything that happened between us, despite all the misunderstandings and hurt feelings and missed opportunities for reconciliation, Madison will always be the person who taught me what it means to have a best friend. And for that gift, painful as its ending was, I will always be grateful.